some good food. All right, so I will go ahead and get through a short lecture on assessment instruments and also introduce you to the forum that you're responsible for completing this week. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started and talk a little bit about specific assessment instruments. So far, we've pretty much just covered sort of clinical interview style assessing. And here we're going to break it down into some more structured research-based assessment tools. So I'll just start off by saying that there are a wide variety of standardized assessments, as you have probably already learned from your course that focused on this. But today we're specifically going to focus on trauma-related assessments. And even within the trauma-related assessments, we're only going to really talk about a few. And as we go, I'll share some actual assessments that are in our course site. And so first we'll start off with the clinician administered PTSD scale, which is frequently just called CAPS. It is widely considered to be the gold standard in terms of structured interviews for diagnosing an individual with PTSD. You'll see, and I can share it with you guys. Let's see right now. So if you go into the resources folder of our course site, and then from there, you go into class resources. And from there, you go into assessments. You have a variety of different assessments linked. I'm just going to go over to the CAPS. You'll see it gives very detailed instructions about the administration of the instrument and the scoring. However, I will say that this is an instrument that you need to be formally trained in order to administer, but you have it here in front of you, and it is available for free through the VA government website. So Veterans Affairs, excuse me. But you can look through it here at your on your own time to sort of see a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. I'll just say right now that one, there is a past week, a past month, and a worst month version. And it's essentially designed to help clinicians diagnose PTSD, period. It takes an hour or more to administer, and it also tends to elicit more information than is often necessary. And it focuses only on diagnosing PTSD. It also has the disadvantage potentially of only asking questions regarding one life event. So, more often than not, you'll have a client who has multiple traumas. And in order to diagnose PTSD, of course, you don't need to know about, every single trauma they've ever experienced. But as a therapist, in order to treat that person, you do want, sort of a wider view picture of that person's experiences. So in my view, more helpful might be a global measure like Brier's trauma symptom inventory. And I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I don't believe I have a copy of the trauma symptom inventory on hand, but the TSI is a standardized 136 item self-report. It evaluates the level of traumatic distress experienced in the last 6 months, and the items aren't keyed to any one specific experience. So for example, respondents might be asked to rate the frequency with which they might have pushed painful memories out of their minds in the last 6 months. The TSI also evaluates symptoms relating to 12 different clinical scales, including things like anger, defensive avoidance, somatic preoccupation, suicidality, things like that. So it gives you a really nice sort of global picture that also does a good job of honing in on specific details that would be relevant in terms of treatment. That assessment is only available for purchase, and the scoring is computerized. So you can purchase, I believe, like a one use only assessment, and then you give them back the assessment and you get essentially a results report. Or I believe you can purchase sort of lifetime access to the instrument, and I'm not quite sure how expensive that is, but you can find it just by Googling the TSI. Briere, who is the author of obviously one of our textbooks, has devised numerous really reliable, highly validated assessment instruments. But for now, I'm just going to sort of switch gears and talk a little bit about life events questionnaires, because these are just incredibly valuable tools to know about and to have on hand in your practice. Life events questionnaires can be helpful in ascertaining the full spectrum of potentially traumatic events a person has been exposed to, but oftentimes don't necessarily give you automatic information on in terms of the impact those events have had on them. So sometimes they might not spontaneously disclose life events, either because they're reluctant to talk about them out loud, but they might feel a little bit more comfortable writing about them, or because they don't think of them as traumatic, or for a wide variety of reasons. And one example of the life events questionnaire is the life events checklist, appropriately named. And it is a standard, well, there's a self-report version, there's an extended self-report version, and there's an interview version. So clients can fill it out for themselves, or you can conduct it in an interview form. And all three of those versions are in our folder on our course site. The difference between the regular version and the extended report version is that the extended version asks follow-up questions about the worst event that they've experienced. And I'll just show that to you guys quickly. If I can find it. So here is the life events checklist extended version, modified for the DSM-5. And you see it's very brief. It simply asks questions in terms of whether this has happened to me, whether I've witnessed it, whether I've learned about it, whether it was part of my job, not sure, or doesn't apply. And it goes through a wide variety of experiences. Certainly does not cover all different types of traumatic experiences. You'll see fire, explosion, serious accident at home or work, assaults, unwanted or uncomfortable sexual experiences, which is wonderful that they differentiate between that and above sexual assault, rape, attempted rape. Let's see, life-threatening illness or injury is included here. And then I'm just going to scroll down. So since this is the extended version, part 2 asks, if you checked off anything for number 17, other very stressful life events or experiences, what event were you talking about? And then it asks you to describe briefly the worst event in further detail. Now, of course, this might seem like it sort of excuse me, stands in conflict with what we've been talking about in this course in terms of not diving directly into the nature of the traumatic experience right away. And so I think that, I'm not going to get into that in this lecture. I think, the nice advantage of these assessment instruments is that you don't necessarily have to administer them in the first session. You could administer them in subsequent sessions. You might just want to know that these instruments exist and not necessarily incorporate them. You might want to have them on hand with a client who maybe has difficulty, sort of spontaneously volunteering information, but clearly has, a detailed history that you need to be able to access. So there's different ways to incorporate this. And you certainly don't even have to use the extended version that asks questions in a little bit more detail. I'm going to close this and move on. So where's my stop sharing? Okay. There's also the revised stressful life events screening questionnaire, which is just simply another life events checklist. And I don't think I have a copy of that, but you can always Google it to look into it a little bit more. And then separately, there is the ACE, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire, which you have all heard of if you haven't been directly exposed to it. And the forum assignment for later this week, or excuse me, that I'll get to later in this lecture, directly deals with the ACEs questionnaire, but I'll say a little bit about it right here, which is that although it was designed with children in mind, in terms of the experiences that children have had, it is extremely helpful to use with both kids and adults. It is quick. It is easy to do when there is any sort of suspicion of trauma, or you see symptoms that perhaps you might not necessarily be able to explain in non-trauma clients. I think it's worth acknowledging that the ACE checklist only asks about 10 different types of childhood trauma, and there are a lot of experiences that are notably absent from that list. The reason for that largely is because the ones listed were the most commonly reported by patients that were being screened within the Kaiser network where the study was conducted. And these are also experiences which have been thoroughly studied individually in terms of the research literature on them. So it's not to say these are the only ones that are important, but it is to get maybe a foundational look at what somebody might have experienced when there isn't a whole lot of knowledge outside of them just sort of simply showing up to treatment. And I can actually share that with you guys so that you can see it. Sorry, you're looking at my UCSB course for a second. No. Let's see. Here we go. Sorry, it's a little bit blurry, but finding your ACE score. So when you were growing up in the first 18 years of your life, and then it asks you about 10 different experiences in terms of, let's see, we see, did a household member go to prison? Did you live with anybody who was a problem drinker or alcoholic? I'm just skipping around. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Did you often or very often feel like you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, had nobody to protect you, or that your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? So you can see, just looking at those examples, how probably relevant it is in terms of the clients that you're likely to come into contact with, almost in any sort of treatment setting. I mean, these are just extremely common occurrences, unfortunately, that tend to be experienced as traumatic when you're a child. So I'll move on from that for now and say that just one last thing, which is that even given that limitation, that it only covers those 10 different types of experiences, if I were going to have any assessment added to my intake packet in my private practice that, let's say every client would just automatically have to fill out upon entry into therapy with me, it would probably be this one. And your assignment this week involves reading an article that details the really sort of interesting, somewhat odd origins of the study, and how groundbreaking it was and why it was so groundbreaking and what we now know as a result of the study. And I'll say a little bit more about that assignment at the end of the lecture. Okay. So next, I just want to mention that there are some really useful symptom-specific assessments that exist to more fully assess a specific aspect of somebody's response to trauma. So for example, we have the Trauma Attachment and Belief Scale, which assesses trauma-related distorted cognitions and core beliefs, particularly relating to trust, safety, esteem, intimacy, and control. And then there are several inventories that exist to measure dissociation, which, if you are a clinician that doesn't feel very well versed in dissociation, can be very helpful. The primary test that has been deemed to be valid and reliable is Brier's multi-scale dissociation inventory, the MDI, which is in our course site. Let's go there. Here we go. So this is available for free to anybody who is qualified. So a therapist like yourself who has received some amount of training in structured assessment. I was in sort of a back and forth email with Briere actually, and requested this instrument, and he provided it to me. So you could just request it from him, and here's his email address and information. Very nice guy. And you can see, you can read through this test packet contains a description, a scoring sheet, the measure, and a profile form. And I'm not going to go through all this initial stuff. But even if you don't use the assessment itself, I find it really helpful to just look through the questions in terms of, hey, what is it really helpful to ask about with regard to dissociation? Some of these symptoms are very obviously getting at dissociative tendencies, but some of them might be a little bit more subtle, and you might not necessarily know that they tend to be widely correlated to dissociation. So, feeling like you were in a dream, let's see, suddenly realizing that hours had gone by and not knowing what you had been doing during that time, those might be a little bit more obvious. Something that might not be so obvious is somebody who endorses not having emotions or feelings at a time when you know you should have been upset. Or let's see, things around you suddenly seeming not quite right or a little bit off. A client is probably not going to disclose that little tidbit of information, especially if it's something that most of us would probably just sort of dismiss, either dismiss or be embarrassed about admitting. But here it is in black and white, and you can administer this assessment in order to get a little bit more in terms of where on the spectrum they fall with dissociation. So having blank spells, again, I'm hopping around. Um, Things around you feeling suddenly strange, feeling mechanical like a robot, feeling like you didn't belong in your body. So really interesting assessment instrument that I find very valuable. And then let's see, another one before I stop sharing, there is the Solution Focused Recovery Scale for Sexual Abuse Survivors. Here we go. Very straightforward, obviously, very simple. What I like about this is it's almost hard to imagine a way in which an assessment instrument would be solution focused or strength based, and yet here it is. And I think that, administering an assessment like this can oftentimes help get the conversation started, not only in terms of let's say I'm the client, what I as a client might really struggle with, but also what I don't struggle with. and what I'm okay with and what I'm able to participate in terms of a relationship or a certain level of intimacy with other people in my life. And oftentimes we sort of tend to gloss over those things in lieu of focusing in on what I can't do or what I struggle with or what's painful for me. And so here's an assessment that helps you be able to have a dialogue with your client, yes, around those things, but also around the things that I am able to do and that I do feel comfortable with. So I think I'm going to stop sharing there. Let's see. So for this week, there is a forum that has a couple different components, and I'll just show you. I guess I'm not done screen sharing. Show you where it is. So if we go into forums, week 8. So first you're going to look through the assessment instruments that we have posted in our resources folder and that I talked to you about today. And you're going to choose one that you believe would be the most helpful with your current caseload of clients. You might have a specific client in mind, or you might have, all 8 or all 10 or all 4 of your clients in mind, but you're just going to choose one that essentially you feel like would be a useful adjunct to your practice right now, today. And you're going to write a paragraph describing which assessment you chose and why, making sure to note both the advantages and the disadvantages that you believe that assessment instrument possesses. Second, you're going to read the article attached below. Here we go, on the origins of the ACEs study, and then write an additional brief paragraph discussing your reactions to the article. And third, you're required to read and comment briefly on at least one other student's post in this forum. And then the last thing is have a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving break. I'm so thankful to all of you students and all the hard work that you're putting into this course. And I think that's it. Of course, if you have any questions along the way, shoot me an email or get in touch with me via carrier pigeon or something like that. I am available, and I will see you all when we return from break. Thank you.